I selected a really nice textured piece of wallpaper to do this dodo, sketched the bird on the back and then cut it out using a really sharp scalpel. I'd already cut a piece of board to size. It was a plywood, about 8 or 9 millimeters. So once I'd cut round the entire bird, I flipped it over, made sure everything was in place. Rather ashamed to throw away the bit I'd cut out, but I'll think of something to do with it. And then it's a case of sticking it to the board. I used slightly diluted PVA glue and made sure I really applied it quite thick to the paper, let it soak in before sticking it down. So once it was all covered with glue, flipped it over, a bit like wrestling an octopus, but made sure it was stuck down without wrinkles, without air gaps, matching up edges, and just arranging everything so that it was all in place and all looked good. It's the edges and the corners that are always the bits that tend to lift, so you've got to be careful. I let that dry, weighted it down, let it dry, and then this is where I'm going to start adding the texture. I'm using modelling compound here and a palette knife to put that stumpy little wing on. I'm also going to put some onto the tail area. I didn't like the way I'd cut out the tail, so I could use the thickness of the modelling compound to disguise slightly dodgy edges. I'm using Crackle paste on its feet to try and make that sort of lovely dinosaur rough feet that they have. As it turned out, this was not a good idea because though it did crackle, by the time I put the watercolour ground over the top, it filled all the cracks in. Once everything was dry, I put 3 thin layers of watercolour ground over the bird. Didn't have to go fully over the background. If I was going to paint the background, I would have, but because I knew that was going to be gold leaf, that was okay. That dried overnight for 24 hours, and then it's the fun bit of starting to paint. I worked with a pigment liner pen for fine lines, and I knew that as long as I got to it quite quickly, some of that would shift with water. So I'm starting on the eye on the grounds that if I muck it up, I've mucked the whole thing up. I'm also using waterproof Indian ink and working out from the eye. Really paying attention to tones here. You can see my reference photos just in the right hand side. I often work from 3 or 4 reference photos at a time to make them my own. Rather than copying a photo, I might take something from one, change it round and go to the others. As I say, this is all about tone and volume. There's no colour at this point. This is the hard work. Once you come to put the colour on, actually it's really easy. I'm using lots of water to let that ink flow and to get lots of gradation. Where I need a precise line, like here for that lovely grumpy mouth they have, I can use the pen and bring that in. Now I'm going to start working on the front of the beak where it's really dark, so I'm going to use some concentrated Indian ink, and also I will slightly amend the shape because I didn't quite like how I'd cut it out. I'm using water here to lighten the tone, and I'll lift out highlights because then that'll give some space for the colour to do work later on. So it's just a case of making sure that you get everything from the darkest dark to the lightest light, being precise in areas where you need to, so like the nostril, definitely needs to be carefully placed, and it's got sort of wrinkles and so forth round it, and then you would use water to pull some of that ink out. And all along I'm just looking to get, say, lights and darks, precise marks, broad marks, lifted out soft highlights, sharp highlights. You're looking for soft edges, hard edges, and just trying to get loads and loads of variation into the painting, so that really the black and white could stand on its own. So we are going to add colour as needs be. Then I come to the soft feathers, and again letting it work wet in wet there, moving some of that dark round, but making sure that I leave light areas too. I'm then using lots of water to pull that lovely Indian ink down. You can see how it follows your brush mark, which is rather lovely, and you can use a bit of gravity if you want to encourage that flow. The only problem is with having this much water on the surface is sometimes you get beautiful marks like I've got here on the neck, and then you'll wiggle somewhere else round and those marks will disappear. So you're trying to pay attention all the time to the complete painting. You're not assuming that just because it looked nice 2 seconds ago and you've moved on to a new area that it'll stay like that. Because of that water, things will keep moving and flowing. I'm leaving some little sharp marks, and then I'm coming down to his lovely stumpy wing. At this point I'm going to change my brush. You shouldn't be frightened of changing your brushes. The trouble is you tend to end up working with the one that's in your hand. And then use it quite dry to scrape the ink across the wing to again get a different sort of mark. So we've got nice soft marks on its neck where it's all downy, and then for those little flight feathers on its stumpy old wing, we've got some nice dry brushing across that modelling compound just to emphasise. I'll carry on painting, looking back, making sure I'm happy with what's happening. Might use that little spritz bottle to help things move around. Sometimes I'll put clean water down to start with and then drop the ink in so that we get, again, interesting marks. And here I'm spritzing, and look how that ink just flows out. It's gorgeous. I love painting like this, and it moves and creates beautiful marks that you really couldn't get just with a brush alone. So I'll carry on in this way, and then I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of salt. It's just ordinary table salt, and that works again beautifully with the Indian ink. It just creates little snowflake type patterns in the ink, which is great for simulating the downy feathers. It's one of those things that you really shouldn't overdo, though it's so tempting because it's pretty, but that used judiciously, it's lovely. A bit like with the spraying. If you spray too much, you end up with a muddy puddle. A little, you end up with beautiful marks. So I'll let you just watch me paint here, I think, rather than try and commentate, because I'm not sure there's much more to say. What I would say is that this is roughly at twice the speed. I've just speeded up the video a little so that you could see. Oh look, I'm putting the salt on here, and it is a sprinkle, it's not a coating, so it's just a sprinkle where you want it. So now it's time to start working on the feet. Say, if you look at any bird's feet, you will see how gnarled and textured they are, with overlapping scales, and you can really see the sort of reptilian nature of them. They do look like lizard claws, so I wanted to really capture that sort of different texture compared to the soft downy feathers. I used the pen to get the scales and the bumps. I put its big claws in with the brush and ink, and really built up the toes and the tone there going through, and trying to get loads of light and dark in there, not colouring it all in, not making it all grey, leaving little areas and flashes of white for the highlights to show the shine and the more jagged sort of nature of them. So rather enjoyed working on the feet, took my time over them so that I could make sure they were all sort of plausible and the toes all worked and the feet worked together. You'll remember that I'd put the crackle paste on the feet. As I say, it did all crackle beautifully and had some lovely texture, but then ended up putting the watercolour ground over the top, and that filled all those cracks in. So it was actually quite tricky to work with the pen on top, because there was a lot of sort of bumps and lumps in there. But I just sort of persevered. It probably did some nasty damage to the nib of my pen, but hey ho, can live with that. I'm working on this front foot now, just in the same way, trying to sort of make sure that it's interesting, it looks like it would actually support the bird, the toes aren't all sort of overlapping, all those sorts of things that you'd expect to do. But I really would encourage you to try and look at a bird's foot. If you've got a friendly chicken around, that would be very handy. So this is the bit I always love, which is when I put the pupil into the eye. Up to this point it looks a little bit like a zombie dodo. So you need to wait till the iris is dry so it doesn't go fuzzy and get a fuzzy edge. But once it's dry, put that pupil in and it suddenly starts to come to life, which is lovely. And I'm just using the pen in a few places where I want a crisper, more precise line, but then softening it off as needs be with just clean water. And this point, I've got all the basics in, but it's about adding emphasis where you want it to get a little more light and dark, a little crisper edges maybe. Certainly I felt the face needed a little bit more oomph, and I'm going to darken the nostril, darken the beak, get those wrinkles over its nose a bit more, really emphasize that gorgeous swoop of its mouth, things like that. You don't want to fiddle around with your painting, but you do want there to be enough going on visually to make it work, to give lots of interest to the viewer. You want to vary your marks, vary the tones, and just make sure there's enough going on, but without sort of fiddling for the sake of fiddling. Always a hard judgment to make. Very easy to say, oh, don't do too much, but you've got to do enough. So it's always a matter of judgment. Here I am just darkening under the chin, didn't feel that was quite dark enough, and using the water to slightly soften that off, and then using gravity to be my friend and let that fall down and flow down. I do love the fact that when you're working on the watercolour ground, the water sits on top and does beautiful things. And again, just varying the mark making here with that brush and doing a little dry brushing to create slightly crisper marks around its sort of bottom area, for variety, so that you've got big feathers and downy feathers, as well as the sort of harder marks round the feet area. So I'm trying to judge this, make sure I'm not going too far, but I'm really almost at the end, which is always very exciting. Right, here's my Dodo. I've removed all the salt, and really important you do that because it'll muck up the gold leaf later and it'll carry on absorbing water from the air if you're not careful. Okay, so this is the ink layer. Let me move that up so you can see its feet, and that's the Dodo there. So now I'm going to start adding colour. Hooray, it's time to start putting on colour. So I started with the eye and the beak using quinacridone gold, which is gorgeous. And now I'm using some Prussian blue that I've just greyed down a bit with some sepia, and I've also got some phthalo blue for some brighter little highlights. This is at double speed, but actually this whole process of putting the colour on top is really, really quick because you've done all that hard work with the ink. The ink won't move, it's waterproof, so you can just layer over the top and use plenty of water to get lovely soft marks and gradations and all the things I was talking about before, and just lift out if you need to, put in extra, build up that second layer, and it ends up, I say, being a really quick process, but just brings the whole thing to life. I dropped a little bit of yellow into the head area as well, and then I'm working on the feet using a flat brush again with the quinacridone gold, really getting that nice gnarled look, giving it blue nail varnish on its bit of a pedicure going on here, just to tie everything together. So it's a very simple palette of the gold and a couple of blues. Here we are at the end. It's all drying, and if you're interested to see the process to put the gold background on, I've done a part 2. Thanks for watching.